I didn't get any.
Just forget it. Let it go.
Excuse me, I think you forgot my...
$2 extra.
$2, but in front of me got free.
You want?
Yes, please.
$3. What? No soup for you.
On September 9, 2022, Nintendo dropped Splatoon 3 as an upgrade to its predecessor. Naturally, Salmon Run got its fair share of improvements. For starters, the Grizzco building is finally open 24/7, not to mention new bosses, new mechanics, and new stages. Splatoon's co-op mode finally feels more like a standalone mode of the game and not just some side content that people can't access half the time. And yet, as time goes on, it becomes more and more apparent that something is seriously wrong with this mode. When Splatoon 3 first launched, I barely touched Salmon Run. I know this probably comes as a shock considering my entire YouTube channel is dedicated to Salmon Run content so far. It's not like I didn't try out the new features when the game first came out. I took some time to get my pay grade up to Executive VP, I played the big runs, and I played the first extra work. But that was it. Beyond maybe 4 or 5 games to get the first few rewards whenever a new rotation comes around and a King Salmonid attempt here and there, I never played Salmon Run seriously. Instead, 90% of my time was spent on ranked. I'm not mechanically gifted, so I didn't get far, but to put it lightly, I was addicted to PvP, and therefore there was no reason why I had to invest any more of my time into fighting bots when I could be fighting other people instead. To this day, I'm not entirely sure why I jumped ship. What I do know is I took a huge break to focus on projects outside of this game, and for some reason, when I booted up Splatoon after a half-year hiatus, I gravitated towards the silly fish waving pots and pans in my face, and the rest is history. It's also during this time that I started to notice that something feels a bit off about this particular game mode. When I was still focused on ranked, I could play for hours on end to the point where I forget to eat or sleep. With Salmon Run, while I can play for the same amount of time, eventually this thought will cross my mind somewhere around the 3 to 4 hour mark, especially when I'm playing alone in freelance. I'm bored. But why? That's how the idea for this video was born. And ever since I started making Salmon Run content, more people have come out of the woodwork to tell me that they feel the same kind of frustration bubbling just beneath the surface about Splatoon's co-op mode. We love Salmon Run, but something about it is preventing us from improving or stopping us from walking into Grizzco altogether. So after spending way too much time playing this mode, making shorts about said game mode, taking notes, and talking to people in the community, I came to this conclusion. Salmon Run isn't bad. It's great, actually. But this supposedly great game mode is sadly neglected in the hands of the Splatoon devs, and now it's nothing more than a shadow of what could be. Before we start, let's get a few things out of the way. This video is basically me ranting about how Nintendo failed to do Salmon Run justice. Just so everyone's on the same page, I'll be referring to modes that can be accessed from the lobby, including Turf War, Anarchy, X-Rank, Challenges, and Splatfest as PvP or battles throughout this video unless specified. PvE will refer to Salmon Run or SR and any special events accessible through Grizzco. Now, I consider myself in kind of a gray area on the Salmon Run community's seriousness spectrum. At the time of this video's production, most of the hours I have on this mode is spent playing casually. That includes maxing out my pay grade on all of the stages, aiming for the gold trophy when there's a big run, collecting skills to try and buy at the shop, you get the drill. Some of you here who are part of the OG Soup Squad might remember that I've tried playing more competitively before, which is true. But while I do know a little about overfishing and how this side of the community feels, I won't claim to be as experienced as some of my friends who actually hold records. I will therefore be talking about Salmon Run from the perspective of a casual and, when relevant, a prospective overfisher at most. That being said, I will eventually march into territory I'm unfamiliar with towards the end of the video, which is why I'm super grateful to have help from people who do know what they're talking about, and we will cross that bridge when we get to it. I'm sure some of the problems I have with this game will seem nitpicky to some of you, but I'll try to be as objective as possible and you can let me know in the comments if you think otherwise. And in case you're not familiar with overfishing or Salmon Run in general, I'll do my best to provide context when necessary. I'm also guessing some of you might be listening to this video instead of watching it, so if you hear this sound effect, that means I have left visual elements on screen that you might want to take a look at, but hey, you do you. I think I should also mention that I started scripting this video before Splatoon Raiders' second trailer was released. I'll be making a second video going over the implications of how the spin-off could potentially affect PvE in Splatoon 4, but Raiders will not be the focus of this discussion. With that out of the way, Let's super jump right into why I think Salmon Run will never be good enough. I cannot emphasize this enough. I love this game. I grew up with this franchise all the way from Wii U to Switch 2. And when I started putting more time into Salmon Run, it's like I found a way to fall in love with this silly squid game all over again. But have you ever loved something so much that you refuse to leave, even if you know you're being ripped off by the very thing you're devoting your precious time to? I started working full-time about a year ago, and believe me when I say I already want a full refund for the adult experience. Honestly, if I didn't need a stable income to survive, I would ditch my job in a heartbeat. And if anyone thinks the main purpose of work as an employee is something other than income, they've either never worked a day in their life or they're lying. Of course, work should ideally support personal interests to fulfill psychological needs as well, but that's not always possible for everyone. I guess the saving grace is that I'm at least fully aware that I don't enjoy the whole concept of employment. Case in point, the pay for my job isn't abysmal, but I know my services and time are worth more. I get employee benefits and bonuses, but I'm aware that it doesn't make up for corporate zombification or that soul-sucking feeling you get from trading your free will to a company just to survive. And don't forget the mandatory unpaid overtime disguised as dedication to your post. Saw right through that too. Just in case my manager is watching, I have nothing against the job itself. That's just the reality of what working for someone else is like in this day and age. You're probably wondering, what does my personal employment experience have anything to do with Salmon Run? Well, now that I have some work experience under my belt, I can finally fully appreciate how much thought the Splatoon devs put into this mode. This is probably a good time to explain what exactly Salmon Run is. For those who've only heard of Splatoon or have never played its PvE mode, you might know it as the game with squids shooting colorful ink out of guns as its main mechanic. Well, Salmon Run is a completely different beast, and for a game that doesn't concern itself with realism, it does a shockingly amazing job at depicting real-life employment. When you first enter the Grizzco building, you're immediately greeted by the Grizz man himself and sent to 2 training sessions as an intern. And when you've completed them and read the very much optional manual, congrats, you're now an apprentice. As you complete more shifts, your pay grade changes and so does your job title, which goes all the way to Executive VP. But unlike Splatoon's PvP mode, you don't get paid solely in cash. You get paid in points, which then lead to standardized threshold-based payouts. You receive a new bonus meter every rotation, and you get points based on your performance during shifts. On normal rotations, you'll net yourself a capsule every 100 Grizzco points, which could contain ability chunks, food tickets, gear, or cash. There's also a chance for scales from version 9.0 onwards, but we'll cover that later. The parallels between SR and real-life work are so obvious that it's safe to equate it to Splatoon's version of a corporate job. A corporate ladder, performance-based pay, bonuses, additional employee benefits, mandatory overtime. Heck, there is even a company slogan. But for some reason, while the source of income for most of us in reality is tied to office work or taking up shifts somewhere, that's not the case in Splatoon's culture as a whole. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that Salmon Run is considered a less conventional way of earning your keep in this fantasy setting. Turf wars and anarchy battles, instead, are the better promoted and more popular choice by a long shot. Just take a look at the news. Deep Cut first announces the updates or challenges, if any, followed by the current turf war rotation, anarchy battle rotations, and then finally mentions briefly that Grizzco is hiring. Safe to say that PvP in the universe of Splatoon is the go-to method for gaining income and social standing for every Inkling and Octoling. Now, why could that be? The most plausible in-universe explanation I can think of is monetary compensation, specifically the payment difference between the two occupations. In real life, corporate jobs usually provide the most stable form of income and better compensation packages overall, which is why most of the population isn't hopping in and out of boxing rings for prize money or chasing dreams for survival. Let's assume that this trend occurs in Splatoon as well, except it goes in the opposite direction. If this universe has two main ways of procuring income, and these two methods have significantly different payouts, everyone will naturally gravitate to the higher paying one. Putting that into Splatoon's context, this means engaging in blood sport is the most profitable and accessible form of occupation, and Salmon Run is the less appealing job of the two. You might be thinking, how bad could this pay gap be anyway? Well, here's what I found. To start, let's try to determine what classifies as pay in Splatoon. Much like the game's work culture, every Inkling's priorities are flipped on its head in comparison to reality. What is deemed as survival essentials seem like afterthoughts in this universe. In real life, every human's top 3 needs are food, clothing, and shelter. In Splatoon, there's no evidence that anyone needs to pay rent, so let's assume that shelter is either not a point of concern or it's just free for all. There's also no evidence that squids and octos need to eat consistently, but in case they do need sustenance, Salmon Run offers grab-and-go tickets as a sort of supplementary benefit. The exact bonus capsules you get each rotation may vary, but on average you can expect 2 orange capsules each with cash increasing food, 40% chance of being the regular crab trap sandwich, and 10% chance of it being the commercial version, as well as 2 blue drink capsules that each have a 40% chance of containing 1 drink ticket or 10% for 4. While PvP doesn't really come with benefits of that sort, there is a shell-out machine in the lobby that has a 14% drop rate for drink tickets and a combined 23% drop rate for food, though since you can earn the necessary currency to use the machine from both Battles and Salmon Run, you can argue that it is technically not PvP exclusive, so we'll treat it as just another shop for now. Clothing is probably the most important out of these 3 essentials in the game, but only because of how much everyone in the universe cares about freshness. There are 5 main ways for procuring gear in the game: Amiibo, which isn't relevant to this discussion, seasonal catalogs, ordering from Spike, purchasing from Splatoon's many shops including Splatnet, and exchanging with Salmon Run points, where you're basically guaranteed at least 1 item of clothing per rotation with additional chances via pink capsules. We'll come back to clothing in more detail later, but for now, just remember it's an important facet of Inkling and Octoling life where it literally affects your social standing. So far, running Salmon seems a tad more enticing than battling others, at least in terms of supplementary benefits. But we don't have to talk about these forms of compensation anymore, because once we start to consider payment in terms of Splatoon's main currency, everything falls apart. In this universe, the most important form of currency is cash. There's literally no reason to argue otherwise. Just look at the top right corner of the game UI and, oh look, cha-ching! And trust me, we will have a long talk about other currencies later, so just ignore them for now. Earning cash is a no-brainer in PvP. The general gist is winning equals more money and losing equals less. Turf War is the safest option out of all modes since you will get paid even if you lose as long as you remember to paint the floor. The time it takes for 1 match is also the shortest out of all PvP modes, and there's no chance of overtime, so you could earn cash pretty quickly. Anarchy and X battles are high risk, high reward. If you win with a knockout, you get 3k straight into your pocket, but if you get knocked out, you receive nothing. I won't go into detail about how the payout for each mode and win-loss situation is calculated, but in case you're interested in the actual formulas, I have this video from Vasco Games linked in the description. Salmon Run's cash earning potential, however, is a little more complicated and not just in a formulaic way. I mean it's complicated as in you barely earn anything from it. Okay, let's say you spend 1 hour playing Turf War and 1 hour playing Salmon Run. Assuming there are no wait times while queuing, you can play 20 matches of Turf War in an hour and about 10 SR shifts an hour. For this estimate, imagine you win half your Turf War matches and lose the other half, and you always ink 500 points worth of turf. After an hour, you'll have netted yourself 20k worth of cash. Now about Salmon Run, oh boy. Let's say you're starting the rotation at Executive VP 400. If Inkopedia has the right formula, the pay grade at EVP is 2.3, plus your rank points divided by 50 times 0.05. So at EVP 400, your pay grade starts at 2.7. But that's not all. The amount of Grizzco points you get per shift also takes into consideration your job score and clear bonus. Your job score is calculated based on the number of golden eggs collected and power eggs divided by 200. Let's say you're an insane overfisher that can produce this score consistently. The clear bonus is an additional 50 points for clearing 3 waves and 100 for defeating the king salmonid. Assuming you win every single game in the hour but never defeat any kings, and factoring the increasing pay grade after each clear, 1 hour of Salmon Run will get you the grand total of 6,674 Grizzco points. before we calculate the amount of cash we earn from this hour-long session, let me just throw all that math I did in the trash because none of that actually matters. Remember when I talked about the bonus meter and capsules a few paragraphs back and how you could get a capsule every 100 points? Well, I may have left out an important point. Several important points, in fact, because the moment you reach 1,200 points in a regular rotation, your bonus meter payout will slow down to 200 points per capsule, and then 400 per capsule from the 4,000 point mark onward. And that's not all. There are usually 2 yellow capsules available per rotation up till 1,200 points that guarantee cash payouts. Blue, green, and orange capsules also have a 50-50 chance of dropping cash, albeit not a lot. Yay, money! However, the moment you hit 1,200 points, there are no more yellow capsules for the remainder of the rotation, or blue capsules, or green capsules, or orange capsules. From that point onward, the only remaining rewards are pink capsules, which can only contain gear and whatever showcase gear is currently in rotation. So even if you get this insane score that nets you this earth-shattering amount of Grizzco points, and you have luck on your side and get the maximum amount of cash for the rotation, that's just 79k. And you're probably thinking, 79k from an hour of Salmon Run is a lot more than 20k from an hour of Turf. And I would agree with you. Except one Salmon Run rotation usually lasts for 40 hours, and you only get one single bonus meter in those 40 hours. 79k is literally the maximum amount you can earn for almost 2 days, and yet there's no cap for any of the PvP modes. So by playing Turf with the aforementioned win-loss ratio for 4 hours, you can literally overtake any Salmon Runner in earnings regardless of whether they're an overfisher or a casual player, and that's without considering boosts from food tickets. Also, 79k is a very unlikely maximum that's completely RNG dependent. On most rotations, you're probably looking at something closer to the 37 to 47k range. I'm not saying there is a problem with squids earning more money via Bloodsport than a regular job, or that Splatoon's work culture has to reflect reality. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. In fact, I'd love to see a world where everyone can do something more interesting than a 9-to-5 for a living, especially when you consider how Grizzco shares similarities with toxic workplaces that exploit their workers for profit. My problem with this is that it automatically sets Salmon Run at a disadvantage within Splatoon's player base. You can probably tell where I'm getting at here. Without strong incentives, it's very difficult to get players to stay loyal to a game. But for some reason, it seems like Nintendo doesn't want people to stay loyal to Salmon Run at all. I personally love this mode so much that I'm willing to see past all of this and put in the hours, despite not getting a single dime out of it beyond the 1 hour mark each rotation. Unlike my real-life job, I'm willing to get ripped off for my work at Grizzco, and maybe that's sad, but I don't mind it all too much. What I do mind is how it's driving the bulk of Splatoon 3's player base away from investing more time into the mode. Just like how I would never step foot in the corporate world if not for a stable income, most players wouldn't just willingly hand their souls over to Grizzco without some kind of return. There has to be some form of compensation or incentive involved. And because Salmon Run is one of the worst ways to earn cash in the game, there goes one of said incentives. I know some of you Splatoon veterans are already typing in the comments. So what? I don't play the game for cash. I already own every single piece of clothing and decor that could be bought with cash, and I don't use the shell-out machine besides getting a daily capsule pool. First of all, great, I'm genuinely happy for you. But also, that is exactly what I want to talk about next. Have you ever noticed how little time it takes to buy out the shops in Splatoon? Sure, the gear stores in Hotlantis only offer a limited selection every day, but combined with the Splatnet store and gear ordering via Spike, it's almost laughably easy to get your hands on everything. I'm too lazy to tally up everything by myself, but luckily, Incopedia has the stats. So if their math is mathing, the total amount you need to buy every single piece of non-RNG dependent gear and locker item is 14,288,541 coins. Based on the scenario we used previously for Turf Wars, that means after playing for a little under 715 hours, you'll have all the cash you'll ever need for most of the game's collectible clothing and locker items. And if you're good at ranked and knockout often, you could potentially bring that number down even more. Which means if you put in semi-decent hours into the game, money is almost never a cause for concern, unless you're a gacha addict, that is. At this point, some of you with collector's anxiety might turn your attention to the Grizzco store. You've already bought out Not Couture, Mano Wardrobe, Crush Station, and Hotlantis. Why not empty the Grizzco shelves too? Well, there's a small problem. The Grizzco store does not accept cash payments. Instead, you have to pay with scales, which you can only obtain by fighting King Salmonid in an extra wave or, as of version 9, redeeming them as part of the bonus meter rewards, and because of this, scales are pretty difficult to come by. To get scales in normal shifts, you have to fill up your Salmon meter and trigger an extra wave, which can take anywhere between 1 to 5 or more shifts depending on how much your team's meters are filled, and a bit of luck, which I will explain in detail later. Assuming you don't ever drop matches and you're playing normally without throwing games, that's around 1 extra wave per 20 to 30 minutes. Okay, you landed yourself in mandatory overtime. Now what? There are 3 factors that determine the number of scales you get per type after an extra wave. Number 1, speed, or how quickly you defeat the king. Or kings, plural, but we'll get to that later. This determines the number of scales you receive in total at the end of extra wave, with a minimum of 2 and a maximum of 13 in normal rotations. The faster you kill a king, the more scales you get. Number 2, hazard level. This affects how likely gold and silver scales drop. The higher the hazard, the better the odds. And lastly, RNG. The general rule of thumb is bronze has the highest drop chance and gold has the lowest. Using max hazard level as an example, there's a 3% chance for gold scales to drop and a 20% for silver. And in case it's not apparent, 3% of 13 is less than 1, which makes gold scales extremely rare. Alright, so far we've established that the scale collecting process is pretty inconsistent and luck reliant. But let's give the system the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it's here because the Grizzco shop doesn't offer as many items. After all, there are a total of 1,290 cash-based gear and locker items, whereas the Grizzco store only offers 135 scale-based items. Maybe this system's purpose is to balance out Salmon Run so it takes roughly the same time to get everything from Grizzco versus the plaza shops. Which is why it doesn't make any sense that it takes double or even triple the time to get every single scale collectible in the game in comparison to coin-based items.
Bruh.
Don't believe me? Let's say you're a pretty lucky person and not only do you defeat every single king at top speed, but you also get 1 gold, 2 silvers, and 10 bronzes every single extra wave. For your reference, the total amount of scales needed to unlock everything in the Grizzco shop at least once is 16,744 bronzes, 3,288 silvers, and 1,282 golds. Without the bonus meter rewards and triumvirate boost, they'll still take 1,675 king encounters, or anywhere between 558 to 838 hours. At first glance, this doesn't seem too bad until you realize the average person probably won't be this lucky. I'm not the best with stats, but this 10 bronze, 2 silver, 1 gold result is really idealistic, as in it might be one of the most optimized outcomes possible. For a casual freelance player, you might get stuck with randos who don't know the best strategies for defeating the king on rotation and receive fewer than 13 scales. For some of you who are at the final stretch, more often than not, you might find yourself stuck with a bunch of excess scales you don't actually want, and without any in-game system in place to exchange one scale type for another, it might take even longer. And just in case you still don't believe me, here's every single extra wave result I got from a 5-hour session on Jam and Salmon Junction. None of the king encounters came with the 10 bronze, 2 silver, 1 gold combo. In fact, while I did clear every Koizuna I encountered with these random teams, we never managed to defeat it with enough speed. That means we only receive 10 scales total most of the time, 3 away from the maximum. If I get this number of scales every 7 games, it'll take me 8,974 king encounters to clear the Grizzco shelves, or at least 2,991 hours, which is way more than 500 hours. What do you mean I only get 1 gold scale every 7 kings? Okay, let's take a moment to step back and put this all into scale. If you have collector's anxiety and you've played Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, you'll know exactly where I'm going with this, but allow me to go on a small tangent about Korok hunting. With 1,900 Korok seeds scattered all over the map across both games, the process of collecting them is grueling with not a lot of incentive to keep you going, except, spoilers alert, this golden turd waiting for you at the finish line. There's a reason why this is an optional part of this game. Not everyone has the energy, time, or motivation to hunt down Koroks, and even the most seasoned perfectionists will probably have trouble with keeping motivations high midway through their collection journey. I, for one, have my Tears of the Kingdom map completion rate sitting at 98% because I never tracked my Koroks properly and I could not, for the life of me, find the last few I left off even with guides. So I just gave up. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because scales in Salmon Run are a similar story. They're technically optional as well, since everything in the Grizzco shop is purely cosmetic and has no real benefit to the game's progression or your performance. After all, you don't see me get a 400 egg shift by equipping a gold banner. So technically, if you don't care about buying at the store, this won't apply to you at all. But for my completionist friends out there, the difference between Korok seed hunting and scale farming is that Korok seeds are predictable. If you have a guide on your hands, all you have to do is follow it and you're bound to find every last one of them at some point. If there are 1,000 seeds in the game, all 1,000 of them are in set locations, and you'll always get a fixed amount of seeds from each Korok challenge. In Salmon Run, however, there's no such guarantee. Even if you beat the king fast enough at the highest hazard level to get the maximum amount of scales, you can still get a whopping 13 bronze out of 13 scales. This is where RNG becomes problematic when farming scales, and I want to specifically talk about the psychological damage that comes with it. The Grizzco store is a completionist's worst nightmare. It's designed in a way that necessitates some kind of cheese, since there's no way you can collect everything in the store before Splatoon 4 drops by playing normally and having a life outside of the game at the same time. Which is why Salmon Runners have come up with less time-consuming ways to get scales fast. I've already talked about how king throwing and cycling work in previous shorts, which I will link in the description, but here's a quick recap. Since there's a guaranteed extra wave if all teammates have full Sama meters, and that meter fills up regardless of if you win or lose a shift, some runners exploit the system by throwing either 5 games straight for a king at the cost of pay grade, or cycle between throwing 3 or 4 games to maintain their rank at the cost of time, since they'll potentially be spending more time triggering a king with varying degrees of success. I personally think that both of these methods come with an additional hidden cost. They're very taxing mentally. During the days where I used to king throw a lot, I'll get so bored of yeeting myself off the stage over and over again that I usually have to multitask. In fact, I was so understimulated that a portion of this video essay was brainstormed while I was king throwing. Then I burned out completely and had to step away from throwing. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. A few people I've talked to that frequent the king throwing side of the community also agree with this sentiment. It gets really difficult at times, especially when all they need is a particular type of scale and they keep getting ones they don't want, but since farming is the quickest scale collecting method currently available, it's seen by some completionists as a necessary evil. I know the scale system has its merits. With resource scarcity in place, players have more incentive to play the game because they want the rare scales to unlock the gear they want, which is also rare by proxy. But the thing is, because of how time-consuming and repetitive scale collecting can be, players are also more likely to lose intrinsic motivation fast. If king throwers are complaining about boredom while farming, imagine how the majority of Splatoon's player base feels about scale collecting. Of course, you could always argue that bonus meter rewards and triumvirates could reduce the required time by quite a bit, and while I'd agree that these are the few good blessings that came out of this mess, this doesn't take away from the fact that there's still way too much randomness involved to reliably collect the scales necessary for completion. I'm not saying it's not a good thing to make this process challenging, but when the challenge boils down to luck instead of skill at the end of the day with no way to compensate via skill or trading, isn't that a little disheartening? I'm not a game designer, so I don't have an answer to this question, but at what point is an incentive considered so overtuned that it drives people away from the game? Where do you draw the line between a collecting system that motivates players to push themselves and a collecting system that is so intimidating and time-consuming that it pushes players away entirely? You could argue that scales are Nintendo's way of enticing players to keep playing Salmon Run, and I guess I will agree it's partially effective for someone like me since I definitely wouldn't be playing as much without the system in place. Heck, I won't even be king throwing. But I also wouldn't have burned myself out trying to chase after this trail of breadcrumbs that the devs obviously left as an excuse to keep people playing. The way I see it, as both a Salmon Runner and as someone with completionist tendencies, is that the skill system is understandably necessary as a form of currency and by extension an incentive, but it also clearly needs a makeover to achieve its original purpose of keeping more players in the game. And speaking of incentives, up until this point, I've been talking about incentives only in terms of rewards, but that's about to change because, like many online multiplayers, Splatoon doesn't rely solely on a single source of motivation to keep players hooked. After all, when the seasoned Splatoon Pro runs out of clothing items to collect in the game, they don't just stop playing. They keep going. You keep going. But why? Enter incentive number 2, which I dub a good challenge. Again, I'm not a game designer, so feel free to let me know your thoughts in the comments, but as a video game enjoyer, here's what I think makes for a good challenge. a series of clear goals that pair with attainable rewards, incremental increases in difficulty, and a reasonable time frame for execution. Sounds complicated? Yeah, no, I don't know why scriptwriting Soup worded it this way. Let me just explain this within the context of Splatoon instead. The devs have designed a whole series of goals for players to follow, and to know what the intended goals are, we have to look at what achievements the game acknowledges. Immediately, badges stand out as one of the most obvious forms of in-game acknowledgement. At the time of recording, there are a total of 1,542 Splatoon badges that mark a variety of achievements, 81 of which are specifically from PvE, including lifetime Grizzco points, Salmon at Splats, event placements, and stage-specific EVP rankings. Using the last one as an example for what a challenge might look like, let's say the Octoling's favorite Salmon Run stage is Jammin' Salmon Junction, and they want to get their hands on the JSJ badge. They discovered that in order to obtain this badge, they need to reach EVP 200 on the stage, and now they're super motivated to play Salmon Run when this stage is in rotation. This is how the prospect of gaining a reward, in this case a badge, guides a player's actions. But that's not all. This Octo knows that a stage only stays in rotation for about 40 hours, and they must reach EVP 200 before the rotation ends, or else their rank gets reset back to the nearest checkpoint and they lose all their progress. This time limit creates a sense of artificial urgency that influences them to go all out. So let's say this Octoling manages to grab themselves a shiny new JSJ badge. Now, what should they do? Luckily for them, they don't have to think for long because the JSJ badge conveniently comes in different colors that signify how far up the rank someone has climbed. They've already reached EVP 200. Why not play for a bit longer to see if they could get to 400 for the bronze badge as well? That way, if they quit and come back when the stage is in rotation again, they'll start at EVP 200 instead of 40, so it'll be a waste if they don't try to climb, right? These different colored badges are increasingly difficult to get, paving an obvious path for players to follow, which keeps them motivated to play for longer periods of time, chasing one goal after another. You can even argue that the presence of a ranking system, with or without the badges, can be considered as a challenge itself. The badges simply provide an easy access to bragging rights as part of the player's splash tag. What exactly counts as a good challenge is of course subjective, based entirely on the skills, dedication, and preferences of each game's player base. As a side note, game devs more often than not set a particular goal with one subset of players in mind while failing to address the concerns of others, but a decent variety of challenges will at least keep some receptive players around. Take Splatoon's PvP as an example. The prospect of climbing regional ranks in X battles is definitely aimed at the more competitive side of the fanbase, including comp players. So while casuals might not be interested in this mode, they have access to other challenges, whether it be increasing their levels with XP, turning to Anarchy and improving their rank there with lower stakes, or collecting other PvP badges not exclusive to X rank. For the most part, Salmon Run's badges mirror the ones accessible through PvP. For example, the Salmon at Splats badges are similar to Weapon Star rankings in a way where they're both a little grindy and time-consuming. The Triumvirate badge is a bit like the Tricolor badges, where you need to win during a special event or rotation in order to collect them. But unfortunately for Salmon Runners, PvE fails the premise of a good challenge for players of all skill levels and dedication when it comes to the one challenge that truly matters: the ranking system, and by extension, the badges that come with it. Let's zero back in on the stage-specific EVP rankings. For casuals on one end of the spectrum, this challenge is too difficult. And before you comment skill issue, it's not necessarily that, but more so because the time frame for execution is not reasonable. As I've mentioned a few paragraphs back, one Salmon Run rotation is 40 hours long. Unlike PvP, where the rank resets in 3 months after a season is over, your PvE rank resets after a Salmon Run rotation is over, so once every 40 hours. This means that players who are looking to reach max EVP will have to absolutely lock in during the 40 hours to achieve this goal. It takes at least 4.5 hours to reach EVP 999 from 40, and only if you manage to win every single game and not encounter a king. For players who don't necessarily have the skills to tackle higher hazard levels, or somehow get really bad luck and end up with teammates who have no idea what they're doing, they'll probably get stuck in a certain EVP range for a very long time, which means it'll take way longer than the aforementioned 4.5 hours. After patch 6.0, devs added checkpoints for reaching EVP 400, 600, and 999 where your rank resets to 200, 300, and 400 respectively, so it's slightly more attainable for those who don't have the time to play for 5 hours in one sitting. and instead gives runners a chance to continue the climb during the next rotation without falling all the way back to EVP 40 after the reset. Still, for some casual players who are willing to learn the ropes but don't have the luxury of locking in for extended periods of time, it can get pretty disheartening to see their progress wiped just like that. A friend of mine once reached EVP 200 and wanted to continue the climb to 400 for the bronze badge. However, they then proceeded to spend 2 whole hours stuck at EVP 300 because they, quote-unquote, kept getting paired with people who didn't pop their specials. They didn't get to EVP 400 and ended up crashing out over the fact that they wasted 2 hours of life achieving nothing. And I'm sure they're not the only casual who's had this experience before. The next time they play the stage, they'll have to start all over again from EVP 40 while praying that they learn something from their last climb and get paired with teammates who are actually helpful, which might be difficult to come across at lower ranks, especially when it's possible for people to just stay in EVP forever by stopping every time they're about to D-rank. Eventually, some players just don't see the appeal in continuing the grind anymore, especially when there are other ranked systems in Splatoon that are a lot more forgiving in terms of their time frame for execution and account for the occasional slip in performance or team dissonance. Well, maybe this badge is made with casuals at the other end of the spectrum in mind. You know, those who are super accustomed to tackling high hazards and are willing to go the extra mile. But for these highly dedicated players, this challenge is way too easy? If you already own all the EVP 999 badges, you'll know where I'm going with this, but for those who don't, let me explain. There is literally nothing else to do in terms of difficulty progression once you've collected all of the gold badges. For a quick comparison, there are multiple series of badges tied to the rank systems in PvP. These badges, which are the ones most players will first come across, commemorate the rank you've reached in Anarchy, specifically these badges you receive for reaching A, S, and S+. After getting to S+, there's a clear next step to these badges in the form of the X-Battle system, where you can then fight for regional rankings and obtain a whole other set of badges for being the best of the best. There is, however, no next step in Salmon Run. You reach EVP 999 for all stages, and that's it. That's like if Anarchy capped your rank at S+10 and had no X rank at all. Sure, you can go for the boss badges, or go back to buying out the Grizzco shop. Heck, you can even try to get the gold Grizzco badge, but none of these mark further skill achievement. There is no in-game goal that motivates players to keep sharpening their SR skills, so these casuals are essentially stuck in limbo with a burning interest to further improve, but nothing to gain from it. Also, in case you're wondering, extra work doesn't really count as an X-Battle equivalent. The game treats it like a special event similar to Splatfest that only happened once every few months, and it's arguably not even Salmon Run. I won't go into detail about this, but I've linked this video from Splatooning who has done a pretty good job of explaining why in the description, if you're interested. Here's what I think went wrong. Salmon Run has an identity crisis. It doesn't know if it should be a challenging mode for the most dedicated players, or if it should be an easy mode for newcomers to learn the ropes. It tries to do both, and ends up failing at both. On one hand, the goal floor is too high. You've got a handful of players who feel overwhelmed by the amount of time and dedication needed to get started. On the other hand, the goal ceiling is too low. Players who've reached the end of that road have no reason to keep going since they've already exhausted all incentives for improvement. But against all odds, a third party has risen from this mess, and these truly insane people are not messing around. Meet the Overfishers. And if I have to make a comparison, you can say these guys are the Salmon Run equivalent to PvP's comp players. Somehow, they're able to look the game that won't acknowledge skills beyond EVP levels dead in the eye and say, "We will." By giving themselves goals outside of those recognized in-game, this small but fiercely dedicated subsect of Salmon Run players stuck around a game mode that is slowly losing player interest over time. They have collectively decided that the best way to measure skill is through the number of eggs collected after each shift or each wave, going completely above and beyond the Grizzco mandated quota, hence the name Overfishing. Through community-run efforts, players are recognized when they hit a personal best or celebrated when they hit a certain benchmark, despite the fact that the actual game does not reward them for the effort. Even when the Big Run score tier changed from a dynamic percentage that fluctuates with global scale to a static number of eggs collected, these guys are still aiming for high egg counts and have turned to the community to bring back percentage-based achievements, which, by the way, are hidden in the Splatoon app with no way to access it in the game itself. This system is not without flaws. After all, egg count is not the perfect answer to measuring someone's Salmon Run skills, but it's a start, especially when the game itself has done nothing to help. You can probably argue that this is fine as is. After all, plenty of multiplayer games don't have competitive elements or are not meant to be competitive in the first place. I just find it especially jarring when the coexistence of Salmon Run and Anarchy within one game inherently pits the two modes against each other, and it was never a fair fight to begin with. The lack of in-game skill acknowledgement ends up driving a huge wedge between SR players at different ends of the spectrum. Instead of there being a little something for everyone, players end up feeling neglected regardless of how they decide to approach this mode. If there isn't a challenge that's interesting and rewarding enough to keep someone engaged, it's only a matter of time until Salmon Runners stop playing, and Splatoon devs playing favorites on top of everything else is not helping one bit. Salmon Run has always been an afterthought in the eyes of the Splatoon devs, even though it has the potential to be either a standalone multiplayer game or the perfect counterpart to PvP. Call me dramatic, but these two modes could have been a match made in heaven, designed to support each other. Instead, it's a toxic relationship where one side gives and the other takes and never the other way around. One only needs to look at the resource imbalance within the game and around development to know that I'm telling the truth. Remember how I said we'll come back to clothing in more detail earlier in this video? Well, I'm about to do that right now. We've covered how there are 5 main ways for procuring gear in the game, one of which being Salmon Run. We've also talked about how Salmon Run's reward system works, and I specifically highlighted the distinct lack of cash-containing capsules past the 1200 point mark. If you've played this mode a decent amount, you'll know that, unlike yellow capsules, there's literally no limit to the amount of pink ones and showcase gear you can get each rotation, despite the significant slowdown in output after 4000 points. In one of the 9 climbs I did on Jam and Salmon Junction during a normal rotation, I received a total of 2 blue, 2 green, 1 yellow, 2 orange, 2 gold/silver, and a whopping 55 pink capsules and showcase gear rewards. That means I earned 55 clothing items over the span of 5 hours.
Why are you buying clothes at the soup store?
As a side note, since I already own all of these gear items, I traded every single one of them for ability chunks. That's 88 ability chunks, to be exact, not including the ones I got from green capsules. Where can I use the gear and chunks I've obtained, you ask? Duh, in PvP, where else? You can't wear your usual gear or equip any abilities in Grizzco. Only company-approved slop suits are allowed, which is fine. I happen to think the stark contrast between the freedom to customize in lobbies and the restrictions that come with working in corporate is a great piece of world building and a welcome change of pace. After all, individual freshness and social standing has zero purpose in a mode that values teamwork and efficiency over everything else. Plus, the presence of currencies that cannot be fed directly back into Salmon Run and have to be spent in a different mode of the game gives fishers a reason to try out the PvP lobby, or at least dabble in a bit of ability customization. The more incentives the merrier, right? Okay, let's take a look at the other way around. If Salmon Run has clothing and ability chunks as its link to PvP, then there's gotta be a PvP to PvE equivalent, right? Is there a collection of slop suits that can only be earned via the gacha machine? No? Tickets that allow you to double the amount of scales you get during the next king encounter? It's not that either? Maybe you can get scales at the end of Splatfest. Come on guys, I'm kinda running out of ideas here. Alright, fine, you win. Just drop the games already. So what's the answer? There's no equivalent? Not a single thing earned in PvP can be used in PvE. You've got to be kidding me, what the actual It's no wonder why no one is motivated to play Salmon Run seriously these days when the in-game currencies are actively driving people out of this game mode, but never in. Salmon Runners can't actually use any of the gear or ability chunks they gain in PvE, so they either have to leave Grizzco over battles in order to put what they earn to good use, or let it rot in their inventory like they've never received a reward in the first place. If you're an overfisher, I'm gonna bet that you haven't even bothered to collect your stack of 99 capsules in a while, and I know I'm right. It seems like such an easy fix. Food tickets that can be used in Salmon Run, but instead of XP and cash, you get to increase the amount of Grizzco points per shift or the amount of scale drops after a king. Heck, maybe they can even up the chances for a king. And if that's too much of a hassle, what if ability chunks are made universal where both slop suits and gear can be customized with abilities? Though that'll require a little more balancing and tweaking since, like specials, not every ability is useful when fighting fish instead of other squids. But this is exactly what I mean when I say Splatoon is not developed with Salmon Run in mind, or at the very least, not as an equal to PvP. As a player, you were never meant to get hooked on Salmon Run. you will enter Grizzco, maybe play for a little bit, and then return to Anarchy with your loot in hand and fight other players in the lobbies. The devs seem to only treat Salmon Run as an alternative way to stock up on gear, chunks, money, tickets, and whatever you'll need to stay in Turf War or Anarchy, but never considered the other side of their player base, those who wanted to do the exact opposite. And the cracks show in Splatoon's update cycle as well. I know comp players are always complaining about how long it took for their main to get a third kit, or this special to finally get nerfed, but at least patches were actively being made and the devs were always doing something during the first 2 years of Splatoon's life. As an Anarchy player turned casual fisher, I'm still baffled by the amount of updates to Salmon Run, or rather, the lack of updates to Salmon Run. Granted, there's generally less game balancing required in PvE, so this kind of creeps into nitpicking territory, but maybe new content periodically? A new night wave? A new mode within SR itself, like how we got challenges for PvP? A way to review Salmon Run games with a spectator cam so I can get some sick cinematics for a video instead of reusing past footage from my POV over and over again? Out of morbid curiosity, I've compiled a list of every single piece of new content released in the major seasonal updates, separated by PvP and PvE, because maybe I'm biased and I just wanted to know for sure. Here's what I found. Throughout the entirety of Splatoon 3's content update cycle, there are a total of 54 bullet points about new additions to PvP. This includes new weapon kits, new stages, new features added to gameplay, lobbies, and recon, Splatfest updates, as well as new badges and new modes. Now, what exactly counts as new content could be subjective, but I've at least excluded anything that's universal like catalog items, special weapons, balance changes, and bug fixes. Salmon Run, on the other hand... First, we have some big run and extra work announcements. Then we have new Grizzco weapons and new King Salmonids, which are super cool, like don't get me wrong. But just when I thought Salmon Run updates were actually quite decent, I realized I might not be biased after all. We only got 25 pieces of new content up till patch 11.0. That's less than half of everything we got for PvP. In fact, SR has received no new content for the last 2 patches, while Squids and Octos in PvP were still getting major gameplay upgrades like Flow Aura or some shit.
Hell no.
Okay, so Salmon Run got the short end of the stick in terms of quantity. What about quality? Again, that's subjective, but I think the fact that the devs spent several patches adding 2 whole new modes to the lobby and then further improved them by adding tons of badges that thoughtfully map out skill progression paths is, on its own, a pretty convincing piece of evidence in favor of PvP. And that's not all. In fact, while it usually goes unnoticed by most players, some patches to main weapons meant to improve game balance for battles actually end up screwing Salmon Runners over, but guess what? The devs either had no idea or knew but didn't care enough to do anything about it. I'll admit I'm not the most knowledgeable about game balance for both PvP or SR, but according to some overfishers I spoke with, the worst case of this happened in version 4.0 with the sloshing machine. During Splatoon 3's early days, Machine was considered a very strong weapon in battles with a decent kit that allowed it to hold space effectively. It quickly became a staple in team comps and solo queue, though it was eventually replaced by the horrors of crab meta in version 1.2.0. Machine has since stayed in top tier but wasn't considered problematic, unlike a certain other weapon dominating the scene at the time. However, the devs must have missed the memo somewhere along the line because for some reason, they decided to nerf Machine in 4.0, and boy oh boy did they overdo it. Machine's firing rate increased by 5 whole frames, which meant it took way longer to secure kills and paint the floor, and the weapon fell off the meta not long after the patch was dropped. Okay, the devs tuned back a weapon that was overpowered, maybe a little too much, but regardless, they did it to hopefully balance the game. So tell me why Salmon Run's Machine also received the same nerf even though there was nothing wrong with it within PvE. Machine wasn't anywhere near top tier before the patch, and now with this nerf, it's even worse at crowd control and way less effective at killing bosses. So essentially, not only did the devs mess up and over-nerf a weapon while balancing PvP, Salmon Run was also a casualty for absolutely no reason. That's yet another piece of evidence that points to PvP as their main priority and SR being an afterthought. I'm sure you get the picture. For every morsel of attention Salmon Run receives, PvP gets at least twice the amount. All I'm asking for is the Splatoon devs to balance their developmental resources between the 2 modes, but maybe even that's too much of an ask. Editing Soup here. Okay, I'll cut them some slack for developing Raiders with some of the ideas that originated from SR development. But still, like, Splatoon is supposed to be part of the main ensemble in the franchise while Raiders is a spin-off. I just don't think it's a 100% valid excuse for them to neglect the player base that will arguably be the most interested in getting their hands on Raiders, so can we still get some resource management around here? Anyway, back to the video. After all, PvP is Nintendo's golden child, while Salmon Run is the lost, forgotten one that the devs have stopped caring about. And if you think this blatant favoritism ends up in-game resources and update cycles, wait until you hear about the treatment SR received during Splatoon 3's official North American tournaments. When I was about 10 years younger and the franchise was still relatively new, I watched a lot of Splatoon content on YouTube. One of the creators I really looked up to was Dude. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say I wouldn't have bought Splatoon 1 if I never came across his videos. While I never got into competitive, mainly because I have negative skill, I tried to keep up with the comp scene as a spectator the best I could. Call me unk or whatever, but fast forward a few years into the era of Splatoon 2, Team Olive/Ghost Gaming became and is still my all-time favorite comp team even though they've disbanded long ago. If you've never heard of them, they're basically the Moonlight of S2, except they're a sponsored team. How insane is that? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe only a small handful of Western teams have ever received sponsorships in comp Splatoon history. Anyway, they're a super cool bunch, and they're the reason why I love watching high-level gameplay to this day. So naturally, when S3 rolled around and Nintendo announced the NA League Championships that lasted for a little over 2 months in 2025, I was stoked. That's a lot of official, high-production content featuring high-level gameplay. There's the league show, the actual league itself, the final playoffs, and what's Sunday Scrim? At first glance, I thought it was something like chill practice battles between teams where commentators would point out potential issues that could happen in the actual tournament. After all, scrims generally refer to practice matches in comp Splatoon, and Sunday implies something casual, what with the weekend vibes and all. Except it has nothing to do with PvP, and it's not even an event you can watch. Sunday Scrim is a weekly Salmon Run tournament hosted on the Splatoon 3 app's tournament manager during the 2 months Nintendo was hosting the NA League, where anyone who owned the game and was in the NA region could join. At the time I thought, that's a weird naming choice for a game mode where scrimming isn't really something players did. But I wouldn't know, I wasn't actively running Salmon then. Plus, I was busy. There wasn't much official promotion either, so I just didn't play it. And looking back, I'm kinda glad I skipped out. About half a year later, I came across this group of overfishers who actually played Sunday Scrim and won one. I didn't see much discussion about this event online, and I was curious, so I asked them about their experience. This is what they had to say about it.
You know, if we got this on the Sunday Scrim, we'd already be in first place.
If only.
It wasn't a good format, but basically they also counted scales. So if you got more gold scales, you basically technically instantly won the entire tournament.
So it's RNG based.
Yeah, pretty much.
Turns out, besides the awful marketing, Sunday Scrim was not well hosted at all. This event ran for 10 Sundays in total, with each event lasting 2 hours that consisted of an hour of prelims, a 15-minute break, and 45 minutes of finals. Players could join solo, as a duo, as a trio, or as a full team. The team with the most points wins, and scores are calculated like this. Every golden egg you collect during the hour and 45 minutes of active game time counts as 1 point, and every gold, silver, and bronze fish scale collected is worth 4, 5, and 6 points respectively. This is problematic on so many levels. To start, the inclusion of scales in the score calculation system turns the event into a luck-based tournament rather than a skill-based one. There are 2 whole layers of RNG to consider here. First, you need good luck to roll king encounters. Without a king, you can't get scales to boost your score in the first place. I've explained this before, so I won't go into detail again, but say a team gets amazing RNG and encounters a king every 3 shifts. They automatically have an advantage over other teams who roll low and take 5 to 6 shifts per king. Then, there's scale RNG in play. The rarer the scales are, the more points go towards your final score. This means that any team that manages to snag a gold scale or 2 can almost immediately tip the scales in their favor. And for teams that have consistently high egg counts, they can still lose to a team with a lower amount of eggs if they don't get rare skills. So basically, luck becomes a disproportionately important factor in whether you win or lose, which defeats the whole purpose of hosting a tournament. While yes, luck is almost always present in tourneys in the form of weapon RNG, decision-making rights, or just being in the right place at the right time, it should never be the main focus of an event that is created to measure player skill as fairly as possible. Speaking of fairness, this tournament also fails to put players on an equal playing field. Instead of giving all teams the same scenario codes, or at least forcing all players to play on the same hazard level for the same egg collecting opportunities, Sunday Scrim does none of that. This means climbing to EVP 999 for a hazard level max before the event starts is an actual strategy some teams use to get ahead. Your Salmon meter doesn't reset either, so whoever has a full meter when the event starts will have an advantage over everyone else because they're almost guaranteed to get an extra chance at collecting scales. Oh, and remember the 15-minute break between prelims and finals? Apparently, you're allowed to keep playing. And while any games during this break do not get counted into the final score, you can still fill up your Salmon meter at this time. It does not reset when the finals start, which does not seem fair at all. How are you supposed to measure skill when people can just cheese the tourney and maximize their chances for a better score? I know Nintendo did state that this tourney was meant to be friendly to players of all skill levels, which I guess makes it somewhat understandable why they decided to keep the RNG in. While maybe they had good intentions, the whole thing just ended up being mediocre at best and downright unpleasant at worst. The frustration of the small handful of Salmon runners who played Sunday Scrim is more than understandable. Imagine if the Splat Zone's timer in ranked ticked down at irregular speeds, or the amount of points you get for scoring a football in Clan Blitz was completely RNG based and one single ball had the potential to trigger a knockout or net you 0 points. Sounds insane, right? Unfortunately, that's reality for fishers who played this tournament. And the worst part is, you don't even get a reward at the end of this event. No special banner or badge to commemorate your win, no participation trophy for your locker, not even extra scales for the Grizzco shop. Nothing. As I'm writing this, the 2026 NA League is currently underway, and guess what? Sunday Scrim is still a thing. Have the rules changed? Nope, don't think so. Am I signing up? Nah, I'm not putting myself through the torture of losing to someone because I have bad luck. Plus, I don't know enough fishers with similar skill level and availability to form a team, so if anyone's looking for a teammate, DM me, I don't know. It also doesn't help that 3 out of the 4 events in the NA League are dedicated to PvP, and the one that features SR doesn't even get any screen time on Nintendo's YouTube channel. As someone who likes to watch high-level gameplay, it's disappointing that there's no way to spectate Sunday Scrim or Salmon Run games in general. While PvP started offering spectator view through private battles all the way in Splatoon 2, this feature is still missing in Salmon Run, which means high-level Salmon Run gameplay is always presented in player POV with no way to see how players move as a team from a top-down perspective. It also makes creating content about this mode a pain, but that's beside the point. This lack of special camera angles is actually what limited tournament hosting way back in Splatoon 1, so it's not a far stretch to say it's limiting Salmon Run tournaments now as well. Coupled with the lack of a decent system that can accurately reflect player skill, I've come to realize that, at least within my circle of friends who play Splatoon, that no one's really asking for or watching SR tournaments besides the most dedicated Salmon Run players. Hell, I didn't even realize they were actively being hosted by the community until very recently. And the thing is, an official Salmon Run LAN tournament at the scale of the NA League playoffs could very much work in theory. Nintendo just doesn't want to host one for whatever reason, even though it could be a great form of marketing for the main game or spin-offs like Raiders. Or actually, Nintendo of America needs to borrow some ideas from Nintendo JP because they have proven that an official SR LAN/tourney can work not just in theory, but in practice. This thing was hosted the same year as the NA League, and it was everything Sunday Scrim wished it was but is not. I only understood bits and pieces with the help of Google Translate, so please let me know if I got anything wrong, but there are several things about this LAN that really caught my eye. First, it's not a luck-based tournament at all. The main and only deciding factor of a dub was the number of golden eggs collected unless there was a tie, and teams had one chance to collect as many golden eggs as possible each round with neither kings nor scales involved in the final score. In fact, to further minimize the effects of RNG, teams in the same round weren't just given the same stage with the same weapon loadout. They were specifically given the same scenario code, which meant everyone played on the same hazard level, encountered the same tides, and tackled the same enemy spawns. Some of the scenario codes used in the qualifying rounds were even released to the public a month in advance so that teams could actually get some practice in beforehand. Secondly, the whole 7-hour tourney was streamed live on Nintendo JP's channel. Yes, the lack of spectator mode hinders the viewing experience a little, but it was still a very well-hosted event overall, and we can at least watch the whole thing online, unlike a certain official tourney that received barely any exposure. So if Nintendo ever decides that SR is important enough to host LANs in the West, they not only have to write a set of rules that can actually measure players' skill accurately, or at the very least adopt the community-suggested measuring methods, but also have the right in-game tools to support tournament hosting. Otherwise, official tourneys aren't gonna get any traction within the community, let alone competitive gaming as a whole, and Salmon Run will forever live in the shadow of PvP without a way to promote itself to a wider audience or expand its player base. Again, I'm not an overfisher and I've never been to LANs in person or participated in tourneys in general, so take my opinion with a grain of salt. But if you want to know how I as a Splatoon tourney viewer would like to see SR tournaments presented, or how Salmon Run in general can be improved, you can let me know in the comments and maybe I'll whip something up. For now, it's finally time to wrap up this video. If I have to sum up what I think Salmon Run's main problem is in 2 words, it's either missed opportunity or wasted potential, and I'm going to bet that at least one of these has made it onto the video's thumbnail. The most depressing part of all of this is just that Salmon Run can obviously be handled so much better, but just isn't. Some of these solutions can be so simple too. Let us earn more cash from this mode, or at least make obtaining the mode's dedicated currency less of a luck-based grind fest. Pepper the goal pathways with a few more rewards so they actually feel attainable. Stop shoving PvP clothes that we can't use in the mode down our throats and replace it with something that's PvE friendly. I could go on, but nothing will actually improve because Nintendo is the one steering the ship here and they just refuse to do anything about it. As long as PvP stands in the limelight and takes up all of the devs' attention, SR won't ever be treated as an equal and given the opportunity to be a standalone mode that rivals PvP, even if it already has the potential to do so. But who knows? Maybe I'm actually part of the minority here and most of you think Salmon Run is a flawless game and wouldn't trade it for anything else. If that's the case, more power to you. But as someone who loves PvE and genuinely wants to continue loving it and spreading the love, it pains me to see everything it could be but isn't. That being said, I am grateful that I came across other like-minded players who enjoy Salmon Run despite its flaws. I know it's kinda cheesy, but even if Salmon Runners never get acknowledged in-game, or never get the same treatment that PvP players basically take for granted, and the mode never steps into the spotlight for all to see, we Salmon Runners at least have each other's backs. I'll always remember how people in the community first introduced me to king throwing and overfishing, and how awesome it feels to pass down that knowledge to newcomers who want to try playing this game in a non-conventional way. I'll always treasure the little moments where my achievements, however insignificant they are in comparison to those made by players who are way more talented, were celebrated by the community instead of dismissed. And as the saying goes, maybe the real salmons we ran were the friends we made along the way. I suppose Raiders has also become a beacon of hope recently, knowing perhaps the devs were just occupied by the side project and will go back to making improvements to Salmon Run in time for Splatoon 4. In fact, there's definitely a non-zero chance that whatever the devs are experimenting with in Raiders could be brought into S4 Salmon Run and completely change PvE for the better. But until then, it's up to us to keep the community active and to keep talking about Salmon Run until the devs hear us. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. I know I've been mostly making shorts up to this point, but I've always wanted to explore other video genres for quite some time now, so after over half a year's worth of planning, scripting, and editing, here's my first ever video essay. If you enjoyed this, I think I'm legally obligated to ask you to like, comment, and subscribe. As I've said at the start of this video, I'll be covering Raiders and how it could affect S4 Salmon Run when the game comes out. And who knows, maybe I'll make more video essays like this one in the future. Huge shout out to my friends Omega, Bravo, and Pangus from the overfishing community for their perspective, showing me the ropes, and also some of the footage I've used in this video. This whole project literally would not have been possible if not for them, and I've linked their channels in the description if you want to check out some high-level SR gameplay. Special thanks to Dude for providing footage as well. I'd also like to thank Sadface, Ox, Jumpy, Strike, Cheese, and Queso for gathering resources and betaing the absolute beast that is this video's script, the Salmon Run server on Discord for fueling my love-hate relationship with this mode, as well as everyone who has reached out to talk to me about the silly Squid game over the years. And thank you, again, for watching.